coast of Britain. But what happened to those new arrivals?
As an island nation, Britain has been shaped not just by the waves that batter the coastline. Most of these journeys have been long forgotten, but an incredible record of some survives at the National Archives. From the late 19th century, shipping companies kept passenger lists, logging the name, occupation and UK destination of every person arriving by boat at a British port. So that's your grandfather, your great-grandfather, and your great-great-grandfather. I'm Dr. Yasmin Khan, a historian, and I'm fascinated by the lives of immigrants who, like my own father, came from the Indian subcontinent to build a new life in Britain. Using the passenger lists of 3 different ships as my starting point, I want to find out what happened to these new arrivals, and through them trace the changing story of migration over 3 critical decades. From early pioneers struggling to fit in the 1930s,
he's just shed his Bengali skin,
to those fleeing the chaos triggered by the end of the empire and partition in the 1940s.
I just remember my mum, and she was holding my hand, jumping over bodies and saying, 1, 2, 3, over we go.
And the optimism of arrivals from the new Commonwealth in the 1950s.
You know, when you have the opportunity to reinvent yourself, why wouldn't you?
By tracking down individual passengers and their descendants, I'll find out how their stories shed light on our greater shared history.
I'm very grateful that my granddad made that journey,
Yes.
so that we made our life here.
I'll discover how Britain changed them and how they changed Britain. This is the port of Mumbai, known once as Bombay. And for hundreds of years, one of the main departure points for passenger ships heading to Britain. These great ships link 2 very different worlds that have been entwined for centuries by the bonds of empire. But by the 1930s, that relationship was beginning to fracture as resistance grew to British rule. Power in the Indian Empire had long rested with a small British elite, who collaborated with Indian princes and local rulers to govern. These wealthy colonials regularly sailed on the luxurious ships to and from Britain. The pride of the P&O fleet was the Viceroy of India, with its lavish interiors modelled on an English stately home. It made the journey from Bombay to Britain more than any other ship in the 1930s. These are the ship's original passenger lists from 1933 to 5. You can see on each of them the names and the occupations and ages of everybody who boarded here. And about 70% of the surnames are British. Many of them were colonials who gave their place of residence as India. But I've chosen this ship because there's also a fascinating handful of Asian names. It was during the interwar years that a small Asian population first became visible in Britain. And I'm hoping that by tracking down some of the Viceroy's passengers, I'll reveal the untold history of these Asian pioneers. On its 17-day journey in October 1933, the Viceroy stopped off at Aden, Suez, Port Said and Marseille before finally arriving at London's Tilbury Docks. Among the 71 passengers who disembarked from the Viceroy on the 25th of October 1933, there were 25 Asians. So who were they? 10 are listed as students. People like John Khansab going to Derby. Khadija Sabani, she's just 16 years old and on her way to Sussex. And this young man is 21 years old, going to London, called Netra Dutt. It was common for the Indian elite to educate their children in Britain, and over a third of the Asians in the country in the 1930s were students at schools and universities. I can find most of the Viceroy students on return passenger lists to India within a year or two. But I've discovered that Netra Dutt's death was registered in London in the 1990s, suggesting that he was one of the pioneers of the British Asian community. I want to find out why he stayed. In the India Office records, I found the actual passport that Netra used to travel to Britain on that journey. And this is terrific because it's the first time I'm actually seeing the face of one of our passengers. He looks a bit nervous and very smartly dressed as a young man setting off alone into the world. Using his will and the electoral registers, I've tracked down Netra's daughter, Anjali Martin, a maths tutor who still lives in London.
Hello, Anjali. Hi.
I'm hoping she can tell me more about what made her father board the Viceroy in October 1933 and why he stayed here.
Anjali, I found this passenger list which shows your dad arriving in Britain on the Viceroy of India 85 years ago.
Oh wow, look at that. Netra Dutt. Oh, this is amazing. Oh, and so he travelled second class.
Even second class on the Viceroy of India was very expensive. Still £70 for a ticket, which, to put it in context, a rural labourer at that time would have been earning about £6 a year. I'm wondering how your dad afforded to come on this particular ship.
Well, my father, I have always known, came from a well-off family. His father owned lands in East Bengal. And I have these photos here of him, and he's there. These are like the gilded youth of that era.
All with a sort of bright future ahead of them.
Oh, and look at this one. You can see from their clean-cut looks and the way their hair is oiled and combed over that they're really well-to-do people.
Why was your dad coming to Britain 85 years ago on the Viceroy of India?
I was always told it was for the purpose of sitting the exam for the Indian Civil Service, the ICS exam.
The Indian Civil Service, whose members were nicknamed the Heaven Born, were the top tier running the British administration in India. By the 1930s, nearly half of the positions in it were reserved for Indians. The exams were held in both countries, but it was felt that those who'd studied in Britain, clever, westernised young gentlemen, had a distinct advantage.
My father didn't pass the ICS exam, which was a big disappointment. A really huge letting down of probably a whole family. It must have been really devastating for him and very, very embarrassing.
But Anjali also thinks there are more mysterious reasons why Netra was sent away to Britain.
I think it was quite a dramatic move to get him out of India too. That's what it was always talked about as, not as an opportunity to do the ICS. I was told to leave Calcutta, is what I always heard.
I feel really quite sorry for Netra. A young man, alone, so far from home, and with all his hopes so quickly dashed. But I'm also curious to know why his parents were so keen to get him to England
and to get him away from Calcutta. In the 1930s, the whole of the Bengal area was a hotspot of resistance to British rule. To solve the mystery of why Netra's family wanted him to leave Calcutta, I've travelled there with Anjali. This is Scottish Church College. This is the college where your dad studied.
Oh my God, I've never seen this before.
In the 1930s, the Writers' Building in Calcutta was the focus of British power in Bengal and where the civil service was based. This was the heart of the Bengali administration, and there would have been young men dashing in and out with files, Bengalis working for the British. People like your grandparents would have hoped that a young man like your dad would end up working somewhere like that.
What, the ICS would have helped?
Yeah,
him
the
too?
Indian Civil Service would have been based there. There would have been Indian civil servants. But what's really fascinating about this building is that those exact same Bengali youth were turning away from those kinds of jobs. They didn't want, in the 1930s, to go and serve the British anymore. Many of them were getting involved in revolutionary activity. And right here, in that building, somebody was assassinated, Colonel Simpson, who was the Inspector General of Jails, and he was absolutely loathed.
Really?
Yeah, and he was assassinated by 3 young men. They went in there with revolvers and shot Colonel Simpson dead. The increasing violence in Calcutta was just part of a wider mood of rebellion. Gandhi had been using non-violent mass protests, strikes and marches for over a decade to oppose British rule. But the younger generation in Bengal had become impatient with his methods. What they were doing was blowing things up, storming buildings. There were attacks on railway tracks.
All through my life, it was completely communicated to me that Bengalis wanted the British out, and they were totally happy to use violent means.
There's so much fear among the British about this sort of uprising that's happening. You know, there were 10,000 young Bengali people in detention without trial. With British paranoia growing about the rebels, all Bengali students were under suspicion. Curfew was imposed, and young men like Anjali's father, Netra, were under scrutiny. So your grandparents may well have been very nervous about what was happening in Calcutta. They would have also known that your dad had the profile of a revolutionary in the sense that he's the same sort of age, like 18, 19, 20. He's come from a landed elite. He's exactly the sort of young man that the British would have been targeting.
My poor grandparents, they were just in the middle of history, weren't they? I've never quite thought about how it all fitted together. The events of him leaving and the events of him being here.
So do you think there's a sort of irony there? Because he's being sent to the heart of empire, to the imperial capital, to London, to keep him safe.
Well, I think you're possibly always the safest when you're in the enemy camp. So I don't know where else you would be sent, because the whole of India is about to erupt.
After boarding the Viceroy, Netra would not return to India for more than 20 years.
My father very much resented the fact that he was sent away just like that. He never spoke to his family, he never saw them, and to compound this, the whole time he was in Britain, he never even wrote them a letter. And his mother died without ever seeing him or hearing from him again.
Netra Dutt was travelling to Britain because his parents panicked that he'd be caught up in the struggle against colonial rule. Although there's no evidence he was actually a revolutionary.
But I've spotted another passenger travelling on the same voyage of the Viceroy as Netra in October 1933. A young man called Mulk Raj Anand, who I know despised the British Raj. Was he too escaping the violence out in the Empire?
Mulk Raj Anand appears on these passenger lists simply as a research student arriving at Tilbury Docks in Essex. But there's much more to him than that, and of all the hundreds of names on these lists, his is the one I know. And that's because in 1933, Mulk was starting a journey which would end with him being recognised as one of the greatest Indian writers of the 20th century, and also famed as a radical opponent of empire.
Mulk's memoirs reveal that this voyage in 1933 isn't his first trip to Britain. He'd fled to London in the 1920s following his release from jail for taking part in protests against the Amritsar massacre, one of the most infamous British atrocities in the Empire, when soldiers fired on an unarmed crowd. It seems that his political radicalism gave Mulk an in with the literary elite of London.
According to his memoirs, this was Mulk's favourite pub, the Museum Tavern in London. Bloomsbury was the perfect place to launch himself as a serious writer, and here he met people like T.S. Eliot, Virginia Woolf, some of the greatest authors of the age. And it was E.M. Forster who helped him to publish his first novel, Untouchable, which was a gritty and devastating portrayal of the injustices of the Indian caste system.
In his books, Mulk took on not only the Indian caste system, but also the British Empire itself. I've been looking in the archives for more evidence about his early activism.
He was using his time in London to campaign for freedom in India from British rule. Now, this document is surprising because it's a Scotland Yard report on the India League. That was a group of like-minded radicals, Mulk among them, who were going across Britain campaigning for freedom from empire. And it shows that police were attending these meetings in plain clothes, spying on these young radicals and becoming increasingly anxious that they might win over the public to their cause.
Many Asian students and sympathetic British liberals did join Mulk in the India League. By the early 1930s, there were already 13 branches in London and another 13 around the UK, all fiercely opposed to the injustices of the empire. Mulk devoted much of his time in Britain to campaigning and writing, but as one of the few Asians in the country in the 1930s, I'm also curious about his private life. I found something intriguing in the records for Mulk. In 1939, he married a British woman called Kathleen Gelder. I'm wondering how someone who I already know was such a radical opponent of the empire was welcomed by Kathleen's British family. Using electoral registers, I've managed to track down his niece, Anne Jasper, living in Chichester. I'm going to meet Anne, a mother of 5, and her family, and I've been promised Mulk's trademark curry from the 1930s.
Right, special treat for everybody. Uncle Mulk's curry. Mulk Raj Anand married my Auntie Kathleen, my father's sister, and my Auntie Kathleen was a very beautiful, vivacious woman, flirtatious, and she met him at a party and he was making this curry, and I suppose she thought he looked rather a nice chap, and she went over, dipped her finger in and flirted with him and tasted the curry, and a few months later they got married.
What's in the curry? What's actually in it?
Well, it's lamb. I'm afraid it's flavoured with curry paste and then quite a few tablespoons of Branston pickle, because Mulk said it was a shortcut. I hope you like it.
Lovely. Well done.
It's sweet and savoury. It's very easy on the English palate, from my point of view.
What do you think attracted Mulk to Kathleen?
Well, probably because she was beautiful, but also because she was very left-wing. She told me all about the Russian Revolution and how wonderful it was, and the collective farms, and how the peasants were all happy and singing.
Can you remember what the attitude towards the Empire, towards the British Empire was in the house when you were growing up?
Well, I knew that the British Raj was not good. I knew that my father, he'd gone out to India and he hated the whole British clubs and the exclusivity of the British and the fact that Indians weren't allowed in and all that. He hated it so much. He came home, and so my father and Mork got on terribly well together, apparently. And in fact, in one of his letters, Mork says he got on better with my father than he did with his wife, Kathleen. So.
There's no doubt that Mork is the most famous passenger on our list. When I saw the list and he was on it, I was absolutely thrilled. This is Untouchable, Mork's most famous novel, and his first novel.
Yes.
There's something I want to show you, which is at the back, just in these tiny letters here. It says, it's written on the SS Viceroy of India, which is the ship that he was actually travelling to Britain on,
Right.
and in Bloomsbury. I love that. While Mork had married into a British family who shared his radical politics, his fellow Viceroy passenger, Netra Dutt, was still single at the end of the 1930s. I'm meeting Netra's daughter Anjali and her son Jamie at the Indian High Commission, where her dad had got a job.
It's impressive, isn't it? Beautiful.
I want to find out more about the bachelor life he built for himself in London, to see if it can shed light on the experience of these early Asian immigrants to Britain.
I've got some photos to show you. Oh, look. This is my father.
Oh wow, he's living the life.
Yeah, definitely living the life between 1933 and when I was born. You can see from this collection of friends that he'd made, they were English for sure. Oh, look at this one, in the pub. There he is.
Oh, that's brilliant. Oh, that's amazing. So that's him surrounded by white friends. London in the 1930s, a couple of thousand Indians perhaps at most. They would have been mainly students. Sometimes you'd see the odd Maharaja or prince coming into town. Britain in the 1930s was predominantly white. In a population of 46 million, there were just over 7,000 Asians living in the whole country. The biggest immigrant communities in London were the Irish, Italians, Russians, Poles, and German Jewish refugees. Pioneers like Netra had little choice but to blend in. I mean, he's fitting in with everybody around him. Their life would have been around the pub, around their lodging houses. They would have had British landladies and other tenants staying around there. Who are these ladies?
Well, that's the mystery, Yasmin. Who are these ladies? I have no idea, but they've clearly very happily posed for pictures. Some of them are signed, because this is Betty. But they're lovely, aren't they? Aren't they beautiful?
They're flirty, aren't they? They're not necessarily girlfriends, but they're definitely people that he's enjoying hanging out with.
I don't think he expected his grandchild to be looking at this 50 years later, though, did he? So it's crazy to me because growing up in northwest London, I mean, I'm pretty much the only white person I know. Everyone seems to be Indian or from another country. It's a really diverse area. I just can't imagine, like, having to fit into another culture.
This is just showing him in this completely different life, but at the same time, he's like just shed his Bengali skin. I think he worked very hard to fit in.
Both of the passengers I've traced so far, Netra Dutt and Mulkraj Anand, came from relatively privileged backgrounds. But I'm returning again to the Viceroy's 1933 lists to see if this was true for all of the Asian passengers. Nearly all of the passengers on the Viceroy were travelling first or second class. But at the back of the list, I found this fascinating little group of servants. There's Amir Ahmed, he's a chauffeur for Mr. Garnier. Lawrence Fernandez, who's a servant going to a bank, and Ruth Martin, she's an ayah. That's the Indian term for a nanny. She's going to One Lady Somerset Road in London. Now, looking down the list, I can see exactly the same address here. This family, the Stokes, are going to the same place. So I'm guessing that she's probably their nanny. Amazingly, one of the Stokes' children travelling on the Viceroy in 1933 is still alive, baby Raja. I've tracked the 86-year-old down using the electoral registers, and I'm travelling to meet him in Newmarket to see what he remembers about his nanny, Ruth Martin, and what became of her. Raja.
Hello, Yas.
Hello.
How
Lovely
nice to see you.
I wanted to show you the passenger list, which shows you as a child.
Oh, how interesting.
So here we are, Stokes family.
My goodness. My goodness. Reginald, my father, my mother Irene, my brother Lloyd, and Patricia, and there's little Roger.
And that's you arriving 1933.
Just over 1 year old.
Little 1 year old.
1 year old.
There you are. And it's fascinating for me because I haven't met anybody who was actually
Really?
on the ship itself.
Well, I must be the only one. After all, it was a long time ago.
But there's someone else on here that I wanted to ask you about. So this little group of servants were also on the ship. You can see Ruth Martin, your nanny. Can you solve this mystery for me about Ruth Martin's name? Because when I first saw her, I thought she might be British.
Well, she certainly wasn't. She was very much an Indian girl, a lovely, lovely Indian girl.
She might have been an Indian Christian, or she might have anglicised her name. They might have had anglicised names for the passage.
She could well have been, yes, because she was very close to the family. I do have a photograph of her.
Great. That's you.
That's me as a little bouncy baby boy, and that's Aya.
Oh, it's lovely. The way she's holding you,
with
so affectionate.
Great affection. She's more like a mother, really.
That feeling of sort of sitting on the sari, you know, the sort of all that fabric.
Absolutely.
And
It's so natural.
sort of comforting, isn't it?
Yes.
On this list, she's sleeping on the deck.
Oh, really? Oh, my goodness me.
How do you feel, Roger, thinking about your
Poor Aya,
nanny?
sleeping on deck. Yes, I feel a little bit sorry for her and embarrassed because she was very much part of the family.
Lots of servants would have been on the deck, but even the crew would have been
Yes,
in the ship.
they
So,
would.
you know, it says something about the sort of hierarchies and the status.
I think it must at the time, yes.
Well, it would have been very common for ayahs to come and go and,
Yes.
and come on the passage
Oh, yes.
with people,
Yes.
you know, shepherding the children, looking after the
Yeah.
mem sub,
Yes.
making sure all the luggage
Yeah.
was there. There was even an ayah's home in London,
How interesting.
which had been set up in the 19th century with hundreds of ayahs
Oh, really?
passing through it. And they would stay there. Sometimes they would accompany a family
Yes.
and then find a new position, a new job on the way back. Rogers told me that this Viceroy voyage was just for a brief holiday in Britain before the family returned to India, where his father was working as a jockey. I want to find out more about their life in India, so Raj is taking me to the Newmarket course, where his dad, Reginald Stokes, once raced.
Yeah, I'll go for Deauville.
Deauville. So your dad raced at Deauville?
Yes, he has.
Oh, you got to put it on Deauville.
Got it
Go
on.
on then. Let's do it.
10 pounds on Deauville.
And on Deauville, which is number 4.
My father was riding here when the Maharaja of Kolhapur, who was visiting Newmarket at the time, was a very keen sportsman. He had persuaded my father to join him in Kolhapur in India, where he rode for the Maharaja stables.
So your father was effectively an employee of the prince?
Yes, I suppose he was. And he was very successful in India.
Prestigious horse races like the Calcutta Cup were just one part of the glittering social whirl enjoyed by the princes and the British elite, from hunts to exclusive clubs and parties.
My mother and father were married in India in 1927. The Maharaja himself gave my mother away. The wedding was indeed quite a ceremonial affair. The wedding cake, for example, was as tall as my mother herself.
And you were born out there as well?
I was born out there in 1932 in the Shalini Palace. And the Maharani and the Maharaja at that time were pleased to ask my mother if I could be named Raja, which is a young prince in India. And I remember various things. We used to, I know, ride on elephants and go tiger hunting and pig sticking, and of course everything was really very special for a little chap.
So you were born in India, Raja, at a time of immense turmoil. There's massive resistance to the British, but it seems as if you were insulated from all of that.
We never noticed that at all. My parents were treated so very well. And of course the Maharaja, who had been educated in this country, had close leanings towards the British Raj, who was awarded with the Star of India and other high honours. So yes, perhaps we were insulated a little from some of the turbulence at the time, but we only have happy memories.
I think we came in second.
Second, he was pipped at the post.
Pipped at the post by my second favourite.
When he was 3 years old, Raja and his family returned to Britain for good in 1935 and again brought their loyal ayah, Ruth Martin, with them. Once they were settled, his parents paid for her voyage back to India. Ruth would never see Raja, the little boy she'd raised, again. Ruth Martin is just one of a small number of Asian passengers travelling in this period. The Viceroy's lists are dominated by colonial names, and I'm looking now at the 1935 lists because I've spotted a passenger called Sir Lancelot Graham. He's described as a member of the Indian Civil Service, travelling in first class. As a member of this governing set, I wonder if his story can tell me more about the increasingly violent struggle going on in India at this time. And I've found this obituary for him in the Times. That tells me that just after that visit to England in December 1935, he was appointed the very first governor of Sindh, a province that today is in Pakistan. So he was a key player during a very important, critical imperial decade, and I want to find out more about him. Using a copy of his will, I've tracked down his grandson, Christopher Graham, a retired public servant in Altrincham near Manchester. Hello, Christopher.
Oh, hello.
Hi.
Yasmin.
Great
Good
to see you.
We've got all sorts of things here. Present to my Grampy from the untouchable community, Mughal Emperor and Empress.
Oh, they're lovely.
Brass.
This is a little piece of your family history. There is the list of the passengers who were arriving on the Viceroy of India in 1935. And if we look down the names here, Sir Lancelot Graham.
Lady Graham and oh, Frances, well, there as well. That's the daughter. My granny is a housewife. My grandfather, or Grampy as we called him, is Indian Civil Service. And my Aunt Francie is spinster. She wasn't going to be a spinster for long.
I know, it's a funny job description, isn't it? The fact that he's an Indian Civil Service officer obviously sets him apart, even on this elite ship, because there were so few of them. I mean, there were less than 1,000 of them.
He was quite a key ICS man. He'd been involved in the Bombay presidency, then he had gone to Delhi and was working with the government of India and the Legislative Assembly. But then you know why he's coming back, and I don't.
We're pretty sure that he was coming back to have negotiations and talks about taking on that role as governor. I'm sort of very interested to know what he was like as a person.
So Grampy was born in 1880, went to St Paul's School, a day school, which had a tradition, I think, of sending kids to the Indian Civil Service via Balliol College, Oxford. You had to be fiercely bright to get into Balliol, and brighter still to pass the ICS exam. But Grampy managed both, and then he went off to India and was there, I think, for 40 years, and really committed to the development and success of India.
I mean, it doesn't surprise me that your grandfather was at Balliol, because about half of the ICS at one point were coming from Oxford University. What did your grandfather study at Balliol?
Greats. That's Latin and Greek. And I suppose the theory was that it was, if the Romans could run an empire and the Greeks could run an empire, then so could the British.
Your father's not on this list.
No, he was back in the UK. The sacrifice, I think, that Indian civil servants paid in those days was that the children would have to be sent off to boarding school, and then they'd be staying with uncles and aunts during the holidays.
And from a really young age, from...
Very young age. My father saw his father for his first time seriously when he was about 8. And this is the great man himself.
Oh, there he is.
Yes,
That's the man.
With the Star of India and the Order of the Indian Empire.
Did you feel you know enough about your grandfather's time?
No, I don't. And I'd like to find out a bit more about what happened.
In 1936, Sir Lancelot Graham began the final 5-year posting of his 40-year Empire career in his new role as the Governor of the Sindh province. I've been looking at old India Office records, and I've arranged to meet Christopher at the British Library to share what I've found.
Hi, Yasmin.
Hello, Christopher. Come and take a seat.
What have we got?
I've been doing a bit of digging about
fantastic.
what your grandfather was actually doing
Yeah.
in Sindh. He had a vast responsibility as the governor of Sindh province. I mean, power stops with him in that whole region. 3 million people. It's a pretty tricky task managing Sindh.
Yeah.
The greatest threat in Sindh are a group called the Hurs, who are very rebellious, very resistant to British rule. In fact, so much so that they'd been criminalised as an entire group, and many of them placed into prison camps, and they'd been given kind of hereditary criminality. That meant that even the women and children didn't have freedom of movement. So Lancelot oversees the release of these Hurs from the settlements. That he's trying to help reintegrate them in some way into local Sindhi society. The twist in the tale, if you like, of the story is that actually the rebellion increased dramatically. Just within a year of your grandfather leaving, the Hur rebellion is in absolute full swing. And there are train derailings, attacks on anybody who's seen as supporting the British. In response, martial law is imposed on parts of Sindh. There's aerial bombardment of the Hurs. At this moment, British grip on India feels very shaky indeed.
Yeah. The idea that you use bombing to deal with a civil war is truly shocking. But again, you've prompted me to realise that what I thought I knew, I knew nothing.
I wonder how your grandfather would have felt knowing after he retired that that had happened in Sindh.
We did find in his papers a poem about how things have gone horribly wrong.
We never mention empire nowadays. We've banished British from the Commonwealth. We must go gingerly in less gorgeous ways. We never mention empire nowadays. We've banished British from the Commonwealth.
There's a sort of elegiac tone to it of the glory has departed. It can't have been very encouraging when you've spent your entire career in the Indian Civil Service, see things going so horribly wrong.
It wasn't just in Sindh that the British used violence against ordinary people in the 1940s. Across the country, there was imprisonment without trial, there were places where martial law was imposed, and thousands were killed. And it must have been really disturbing for generations of British people who'd spent their lives serving the empire, like Sir Lancelot Graham, to watch that all crumbling before their eyes. While Sir Lancelot and a generation of colonials were clinging on to British rule in India, Mulkraj Anand and Netra Dutt, the 2 Asian passengers who'd fled the empire, had built lives for themselves in Britain.
Netra lived as a bachelor in London for more than 20 years after his arrival. But at the age of 44, he took a surprising decision in his search for a wife. He returned to India.
He finally went home. He put an advert in the newspaper and he saw two women and he thought my mother had stood nice and straight, and so he liked her posture. I think he must have liked her too.
I'm meeting Anjali to find out how this decision to marry her Bengali mother, Manisha, changed Netra's life in Britain.
Well, once my father married my mother, I think he was very determined to regain his identity as a Bengali. And so all these things that had just fallen by the wayside, like being able to eat spicy food or to be able to start joining in conversations in Bengali, and just generally to be interested in everything to do with Bengali culture.
I'm getting the impression that your mum's arrival just really transformed your dad's existence.
Yes. My mother got him back into meeting Bengali people. It was quite startling that he made this journey all the way back. And he was learning it again. I mean, he was having to... it wasn't just a case of old memories coming back. He was having to practice being an Indian or a Bengali. The great thing about London at this present moment in time is that you really don't feel that you have to choose between identities at all. Whereas I think my father in 1933 came off that boat and I think just for survival's sake, he had to become one identity and he had to lose the other one. And still feel it to this day, actually. So in that I can look at my children and think, you're so lucky you didn't have to do that.
Netra happily lived out his days in London with his wife Manisha and their only child Anjali. But what became of his fellow Viceroy passenger, the revolutionary author Mulk Rajanand? Mulk had married into a British family, the Gelders, that shared his radical politics. He and Kathleen rented a flat in North London, and in 1942 the couple had a daughter, Sushila. But just 3 years later, as the campaign for Indian independence intensified, Mulk caught a ship back to India to join the struggle, leaving his young British family behind. Mulk had to make a choice, it seems, in 1945 because independence of India was coming. Do you think he had a bond to India that was pulling him back?
I suppose he must have done. Everything he's written about is about India. He was a citizen of the world, there's no doubt about that, but I think he was Indian through and through.
And how did Sushila feel about her father going back to India?
Well, I think schooled by her mother, she felt she'd been deserted and that he was a terrible father and he'd left her. So that even in her last letter to me when she was dying, when Mulk had died, she told me about his funeral. She said he had a traditional Indian funeral and that his ashes were scattered in the Ganges. And she said, but I'm glad he left. It was better to grow up without him there.
Oh, even in her dying days,
yes,
as an adult,
that's
she was
what she
still
said,
feeling
yes.
like that.
Yeah.
It's awful.
Awful, yeah.
It strikes me that Mulk made an incredibly hard choice, but he felt compelled to return to India, the homeland that he'd fought so hard to liberate. He later divorced Kathleen, and although he continued to visit and support his daughter Sushila, he never returned to Britain to live. As the daughter of a Pakistani father and an Irish mother, I'm curious about whether Mulk and Kathleen's mixed marriage was unusual in the 1930s.
There's some incredible new research which shows that there were nearly 3,000 marriages between white women in Britain and Muslim men in the interwar period. Now, for me, I'm not surprised that there were relationships, but it's amazing that there were that many marriages happening so early. And I've found some newspaper articles that deal with that intermarriage question, and it's a pretty ugly vision. There's apparently no biological argument against such intermarriage, but the main objection is based on this general social disapproval, that the children have scorn poured upon them and belong to no class. And it ends by saying, from every possible angle, it would seem undesirable to foster intermarriage. It's not essential, it's inadvisable. And that's a pretty repugnant vision. I've been researching another Viceroy passenger who I hope can shed more light on this early pattern of intermarriage. A young man called Ghulam Mumtaz, a Muslim name, who's 29 years old and listed as a lawyer. I've done some digging into Ghulam's story, and although he appears on the 1935 Viceroy list, it's clear that he was in Britain earlier than that because he's also on this marriage certificate from London 5 years earlier. And what's fascinating is, just like Mukraj Anand, Ghulam married a white woman. From searching the birth records, it's clear that Ghulam and his wife Irma Rolat had 3 children together and had moved out to Essex before his journey on the Viceroy in October 1935. I'm meeting Jeremy Reeve, a builder, Ghulam and Irma's grandson, to find out more about their pioneering marriage and what reactions it provoked in the 1930s. Hello, Jeremy. Hi, good to meet you. This is what I've brought to show you that I found. And this is the passenger list that shows Ghulam Mumtaz,
All right.
29-year-old, coming to London in 1935 on the Viceroy of India.
Oh, this is amazing.
This isn't his first trip to Britain.
No. He came over in 1926. His dad was a judge. They lived in a nice place in Madras. They had a good standard of living. He had basically sent his son over here to study law at King's College, London. He married my nan. She was a Western woman, a white woman. I don't think that went down particularly well with the family back home.
You could have had an arranged marriage lined up for him. I mean, that would have been absolutely
Do you think that's a
the norm.
possibility?
Yeah, very much so. Any child of a family like that with a judge as a father, they'd have been thinking about the match from a very early age. And what's he doing going back to India?
Obviously, he was studying and he was being given an allowance, but I think that allowance must have dried up. So he had gone back out to India, and this was his return trip to try and reconcile things so he could provide for his family again.
With his student allowance stopped once his parents discovered his marriage to Irma, Ghulam was desperate to try and change their minds.
He was away from home pretty well a year.
While he's away in India, your grandmother and 3 little children are waiting for him back in Essex. Did they know what was going on?
Well, I do have a letter. It's a little bit fragile because it was written on airmail paper.
So this is from India, 31st of January 1935. Oh, I'm quite well, only too worried about you and the children. When I send you plenty
of money, then I will have a settled mind.
I am really kind of moved by this because to see his handwriting and think of him worrying about the children, it's really touching.
There's almost a bit of desperation at the end. He's purchased a ticket for the Irish sweepstake for the Grand National in 1935, and he says, pray I shall win the first prize of £30,000. And obviously he was betting on a horse called Happy Go Lucky.
But it's saturated with references to money, sending things, presents. I mean, he really wants to provide for them, doesn't he?
Yes, and all it's going to happen. It's
all going to come in the future.
It's all going to come in the future, yes. None of this happened because he basically came back to the UK with very little.
With nothing. So is this voyage the last contact that he has with India?
I believe it is, yeah. Obviously made a conscious decision to come back in 1935 to be with his new family.
That's a huge sacrifice. That breach with his family, possibly an inheritance.
Yeah, it was, absolutely.
Cut off by his wealthy Indian family, Ghulam had no choice but to take any work he could find and ended up doing watch and jewellery repairs. The family, including Jeremy's mother, Malika, were living in Leindon in Essex. I want to find out more about their experiences there. The original house has been pulled down, but I found evidence that it was part of the plot lands. Simple plots of Essex farmland sold to desperate families like Ghulam's for just a few pounds during the economic depression of the 1930s. There's one Plotlands house that still exists, and it looks as it would have done in the 1930s. It's been preserved, really, for people to still go and have a look at it. So we can go and see the kind of place that your grandfather would have lived in.
Fantastic.
So that would have been the bedroom in there, the master bedroom. This was the second bedroom. So 5 in 2 bedrooms. Some of the houses would have only had 1 bedroom. So you can imagine all the kids squeezed in together. And then this was the kitchen. Pretty basic.
It is, isn't it?
This is the toilet. And we have a little look in there.
Oh dear.
Yeah. It was all earth toilets.
So somebody actually had to empty that then and dispose of it down the garden.
Exactly. Plus getting water for anything, for washing clothes, pots and pans. All the water had to come from a pipe down at the bottom of the road. And imagine in weather like this, 2 children and a small baby, pretty hard for your grandmother.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely.
These are pictures taken on the Plotlands. You can see the sorts of families who would have lived here, big close-knit families.
They are big, aren't they?
A lot of EastEnders moved out here.
Really?
Especially once the war was on. But you can also see there isn't an Indian face in sight.
No.
So how did your granddad and his family fit in?
He was a very affable man. He was easy to get on with, but I think Mum suffered some prejudice at school. She used to say how the teachers used to call her Blackie. She had to stand in the corner with her back to the class if she did anything wrong.
But also to call a child Blackie
in front
school,
of the class.
That's horrible.
It is. It is.
It makes me furious because I've got parents who had a mixed race marriage and I never got treated like that. I feel really sorry for your mum to have been put in that position. It can't have been what your grandfather dreamt of when he was arriving from India.
No, you're right.
He's obviously sticking at it, isn't he, by coming out here?
Yeah, well, it's when you think about it, you have to be proud of the sort of person that he was, because he's kept a roof over his family's head. He's continued to provide for them in the new circumstances that he's found himself. So you have to have that sense of pride for his determination to just keep going.
Ghulam served as an RAF engineer during the war before later working at the Marconi electronics factory. He never reconciled with his family back in India. He died in Essex in 1968 and is buried in Pitsea Cemetery with his wife, Irma.
62 was a short life, really, wasn't it? And to see him there buried with Nan, who survived for another 32 years.
What do you feel about him ending his days here in Essex, making that journey all the way from India?
Well, I guess it's quite fitting because this is where he spent the majority of his life, isn't it? This is where he raised his family. I guess in the end he sort of became more English than Indian.
This is the last trace of the name Mumtaz as a surname in your family tree.
That's right, yeah. Other members of the family, for one reason or another, maybe to protect the children, maybe just to have a bit of a fresh start, chose not to continue with the name Mumtaz.
I mean, it's totally understandable, but as a Khan myself, I find it a bit sad because I feel quite proud of my name, and I think it's a shame that people were in that position, really.
Yeah, me too.
For more than a decade, the Viceroy of India carried hundreds of passengers between two very different worlds. During the Second World War, she was requisitioned as a troop ship, and in November 1942 she was sunk in the Mediterranean by a German U-boat. The Viceroy passenger lists reveal extraordinary stories of early migrants from the Indian subcontinent to Britain, and also give a real insight into the forces that pulled people between them as the empire faltered. Ghulam Mumtaz, Mulk Raj Anand, Ruth Martin, Raja Stokes, Netra Dutt and Sir Lance Graham all had very different reasons for sailing to Britain. And their unique stories would have been mirrored by hundreds of others, also arriving in this critical decade, fleeing the empire, serving the colonial machine, or just improving their prospects. But all of them would have discovered that Britain was changing too, and that the seeds of a new Asian community were being sown. Next time, I'll be exploring the passenger lists of a ship that arrived from India in the late 1940s, the Asturias. I'll discover the personal stories of those on board and how they shed light on the dramatic events following the end of empire.
My dad loved his India, but he was afraid for his family, so, you know, he wanted to go.
And the reluctant welcome many received when they arrived in Britain.
This accident was premeditated, and his hand went in the rollers and took his skin off like a glove.
I mean, that's
criminal.
And you can see that next Tuesday at 9. Now, what's it like being a British Asian today? You can join the debate live on the BBC Asian Network right now. Here on BBC Two, we laughed along with them from 98 to 2001. Then we had a special reunion. Goodness gracious me.
That's the family.